Unless I want to get arrested, this is about as close as I'm going to get to Rikers Island, the massive and notorious New York City jail. In 2003, it was the site of an improbable crime, an art heist. A drawing by Spanish surrealist Salvador Dali was stolen out of one of the jails, but the accused were not who you'd expect. For InsideEdition.com, I'm Sal Bono, and this is New York Gritty.
What's a Dali doing on Rikers? And Salvador Dali was supposed to come visit the inmates in the 60s, couldn't make it, got sick or something, and so he donated one of his drawings called The Crucifixion. To me, it looked like a drawing that he did in about a minute and a half. My son could have done it probably, but it's Salvador Dali, and you know, the abstract and the sublime and all the things that Salvador Dali brings was represented to a degree in that drawing.
Salvador Dali was a Catalonian, a Spaniard, who was one of the great surrealists of our time. He believed that publicity was more important than quality, so that the memory that many of us have of him is as a clown. A man who would ride an elephant and do things like that just to get publicity. Salvador Dali was a strange man in that sense. Every once in a while, he did religious work. His crucifixions of Christ were marvelous painting. His Last Supper is a masterpiece.
In 1981, one inmate apparently didn't like the Dali and threw a metal coffee mug at the drawing, breaking the glass and staining the portrait. The Dali was taken down and placed in storage, hidden from view.
And it was placed in the basement or something. And water got on it, so that if you've ever seen paper that's been in water, ordinary water, it becomes water stained from the metal that's in the water. And that's what happened to that piece.
While the piece languished in a basement, its artist, Salvador Dali, died in 1989. He was 84. By the late 1990s, the drawing was back on display at Rikers, hanging in a lobby next to a Pepsi machine. Its value had been appraised for over $1 million.
In order to determine an artist's greatness, you have to wait till he's dead, his dealer's dead, his wife is dead, his mistress is dead, and a 5-year-old child walks into the museum and says, "Mommy, I like that." That's the first real criticism. And Dali has been subject to that.
In the middle of a cold night on March 1st, 2003, an unplanned fire drill took place inside the jail. 2,000 inmates were put on lockdown. The next morning, a prison employee who prayed in front of the drawing noticed something was wrong. Someone had swapped the drawing with a replica. When you first learned of a heist at Rikers Island in March 2003, what were your initial thoughts?
I thought it was a joke. I found it very hard to believe. The area where the painting was moved to after it was vandalized by the inmates in the mess hall was the front gate area, where there was an officer assigned 24 hours a day.
I sat down with Mike Caruso, the former Inspector General for the Department of Corrections. He didn't want to be on camera, so with his permission, I recorded our conversation inside a cafe in Queens.
I can't remember many occasions where a jail was actually robbed of anything this type of value. You know, you might see isolated incidents where some money disappeared out of inmate funds or bail accounts, but in my 27 years in that office, I don't remember anything like this. It was going to be a major issue because I knew the painting did have pretty high value to it.
How about the absurdity of all this stuff?
Well, there is that. It's kind of a Hollywood-type caper, but the replica is actually very good in a lot of ways, and I suppose they thought would keep people fooled for at least long enough for them to dispose of the real painting in the black market.
There was a security camera there. However, no tape was recovered from the security camera.
The unplanned fire drill, the missing security tape, the detailed fake, they led Mike to one conclusion.
And I knew that it had to be an inside job, so that was going to be a problem.
when the Salvador Dali painting was stolen from Rikers Island from an area where officers must be buzzed in and out. Well, suspicion fell on corrections officers at the prison, particularly those with enough authority to stage fire drills, because the day before it was learned that a phony was put in place of the actual painting, there was such a drill. And now investigators are wondering if the drill was a cover.
There was a bogus fire drill that was called the night of the theft. The purpose of it was to clear the area of the non-participants in the scheme so that the participants in the scheme could do their thing that night, which was to bring in the fake painting.
4 prison guards found themselves no better than some of the inmates they were guarding.
Arrested were Assistant Deputy Warden Benny Nuzzo, Assistant Deputy Warden Mitchell Huckhauser, Corrections Officer Timothy Pina, and Corrections Officer Greg Sokol, wearing the sunglasses and walking in by himself, it turns out, because he flipped, went against the others, and secretly recorded conversations for investigators. All were on duty when the painting was taken that night.
This crime is a result of shameless arrogance fueled by greed, that it represents a serious betrayal of the public trust, but also undermines the professionalism of the vast majority of the Correction Department employees who perform their duties with dedication and integrity.
I mean, investigating officers is always difficult because they are sworn peace officers. They're there to uphold the law, to provide care, custody, and control for the inmates that they oversee. This would be the last thing you would expect, that they would be the actual subjects of the investigation.
You know, when you think about it, this was not exactly the most brilliant caper of all time. There were so many things that were done here that made you realize they didn't really plan this that well. They stole a Dali. That's unique. Every piece of art's unique, but particularly a Dali drawing is very unique. It was going to be reported stolen. It was going to be put out in the art world as a stolen piece.
To many authorities, this seemed like an open and shut case. 3 of the defendants pled guilty to second-degree grand larceny and received different sentences. However, Benny Nuzzo, who authorities claim was the mastermind of the plot, wasn't backing down without a fight.
Benny called me and said, look, I'm indicted, I'm innocent, I want to go to trial, and I want you. So, you know, I already had some, very macro level knowledge of the case from the newspapers. I was certainly interested in the case, and it was a challenge that I thought would be stimulating, let's put it that way.
Prosecutors said the drawing was valued at over $250,000. That could have meant a maximum sentence of 15 years if Nuzzo was found guilty. If the stolen goods are under $50,000, defendants are given a maximum 7 years behind bars.
As a trial lawyer, the best work you can do is in mitigation. You're not going to get a clean sweep perhaps, but instead of him facing 8 1/3 to 25, or 7 to 21, you hope to get him in the zone where he's eligible for probation. That was one school of thought, but that wasn't my school of thought. My school of thought is always, if you're in it, you want to win it. Trial work is like a combat sport to me, and he told me he was innocent.
Takapina brought in Alex Rosenberg to testify in court in an effort to contest the value of the drawing.
For the same reason they wanted their expert to place the value of this piece of art over $50,000, Alex was there to shred the value of that Dali, and there was nobody better in the world, not in the state of New York, not in America, but in the world, to put proper value to a Salvador Dali painting. Alex Rosenberg was his publicist at one point. He was one of his best friends. He is the Dali, savant, and he set the value at this thing at a much more realistic number, which was closer to zero than 50,000, but certainly well below the thresholds for grand larceny.
I'm still trying to process the fact that there's a Salvador Dali drawing that's under $100,000.
Many drawings are under 100,000, many. And also, we must remember, when I'm saying this, I'm speaking about in a certain time frame.
In $2003, not in
That's right.
In $2020.
Alex Rosenberg dropped a bombshell during the trial. He claimed that the Dali drawing stolen in 2003 was actually a reprint and not the original at all.
You had testified in court that it wasn't the original drawing, is that correct?
That is correct.
So what was taken in 2003?
Apparently a copy. because the photo of what was taken didn't show the water damage.
And that original drawing that Dali had given Rikers was never restored?
No, you see, because the authorities didn't take it seriously. Remember, the people who work in prisons are usually not art collectors.
So what happened to the original Dali drawing?
We don't know.
No one has any idea.
Nobody knows.
So they stole a replica.
That's right.
They took a fake
That's
and
right.
replaced it with their own fake.
That's right.
So there's technically 3 versions of one drawing, and the original is still missing.
The original, the copy, and the fake. Yeah.
He brought that out at trial also, that this was a copy, or could have been a copy. And here's the funny part, there was no way to tell. Because the pictures of the drawing that they had were behind glass, okay? And you can't do even a hypothetical assessment, okay? There's ways to assess art. You look at it, you feel it, you touch it, you evaluate it, you look for damage. If you don't have the piece of art and you only have pictures of it, it's called a hypothetical assessment, okay? It's valid as long as you put the word hypothetical before assessment.
Following a 4-week trial, the jury acquitted Nuzzo.
This was the most interesting case I've ever tried because I really became an expert in art and the valuation process of art. And Salvador Dali, who I became a massive fan of after this case.
Following the guilty pleas, Sokol was given 3 years probation and had to pay a $1,000 fine. Pina was sentenced to 5 years probation, while Hockhauser was given 1 to 3 years in prison.
In regards to the individual that was acquitted, you have to respect the decision of the jury. That's the way the system works. The only thing I didn't understand is why the other individuals that were found guilty would implicate this person.
This ranks in the top 5 of the most challenging cases I've ever tried, from an evidentiary standpoint for sure. This definitely ranks as my favorite case I've ever tried because it wasn't just a criminal trial. It wasn't a he said, she said. It was a criminal trial with, the focal point being Salvador Dali.
The Salvador Dali drawing has never been found. The guards claim the artwork was destroyed.
We did the best we could. We exhausted all investigative avenues. I still feel that the painting is out there, and I would suggest if anyone knows where it is, that they contact Department of Correction Inspector General's office.
Oh, I think there's a few morals to the story. One would be, don't steal. But if you're going to commit a crime, and if you're going to steal a Dali, replace it with something that is at least within, 4 feet of the same size of it, so it doesn't look clear that the thing was stolen. And then, just keep your mouth closed. That's the moral if you're, bent on crime, if you're headed in that direction.
Benny Nuzzo declined to participate in the story, but he told me he was open to meeting up with the 3 other guards if they were ever inclined to do so. Gregory Sokol and Mitchell Hockhauser declined to participate, while messages left for Timothy Pina went unanswered.
You were very close with Dali during his life. What would Salvador Dali say about this whole situation?
He laughed. Been a big joke to him.